This episode of the Marketing That Works podcast is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard of Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast, period. Let me explain. It's what I make this podcast on. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many, many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm today to get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Marketing That Works. I'm your host, Drew Bedard. A little bit of an old school edition today. Leighton Hart not with me this week. I'm not in the podcast studio. Back to a little bit of the old school in my car, recording on my phone. So for all those new listeners out there, this is how I recorded about 50 or 100 episodes. So you'll get a little taste of what that's like. I wanted to talk to you guys today about a tactic that I think everybody should be looking at and analyzing, and that is podcast advertising. So, yes, I do a podcast, and yes, you probably heard an ad that appeared before this, but I think when we're looking as marketers, when we're looking at different tactics, what's working, that podcast advertising is a relatively new way to get the word out about your product, and it is working. And there are a lot of great case studies out there, and I'll try to put a couple in the show notes. But let's talk about the reasons why you want to advertise on a podcast versus maybe a billboard or a 30-second TV spot. First one is a captive audience. So when Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan or this podcast, when someone enters the podcast, they're captive, right? They're like, and they're captivated. They want to be, they're in a relationship with you. There's a know, like, and trust factor. And you can almost think of that audience is with you for the long haul. Like Bill Simmons and the Ringer podcasts are ones that I'm very loyal to. And, you know, sometimes and most times I will sit through the advertisements because they're done authentically, they're done genuinely, they're done in Bill's voice, and I want to think, and like Tom Bilyeu is another one, that he prefaces all of his podcast advertising by saying these are hand selected, and I actually either use the products or I trust the products. And I think that that's what you can expect. I mean, you know, most of the time at the beginning of my podcast, it's something about Anchor. And I literally do my podcast on Anchor. So you can trust that I'm saying what I believe, which is that Anchor is a great service. And it is. So this is like another PSA for Anchor. But a lot of the products, anything that I might promote, which is not a lot of money, but anything that I might promote on the front of this podcast is something that I have hand selected. Like, you know, we've talked about before, Podcorn, which is a platform that connects brands to podcasters. With that, a lot of times you can go through the dashboard of sponsorships and you can see that there's a lot of people wanting to sponsor podcasts out there, but I am only going through and trying to approach brands that I feel like would add value to my audience. So when you've got a captive audience, you need to be very selective, but I think as marketers, we need to be looking, you know, I'm a podcaster talking about brands that I've partnered with, but we also need to be talking about, as a marketer and a person who's probably in a position with an advertising budget, why podcasting is a viable tactic for you versus all the other digital and traditional channels. So I've already talked about a few of them. So instead of number one, I think I've talked about a few, which is captive audience, the know, like, and trust factor. Most of the time, the podcasters are being very selective with what they're choosing. So they're choosing brands that they feel like you would benefit from. You know, look at Tim Ferriss's podcast and all the things that are on his podcast. You can definitely tell that there's a relationship with that company or he trusts them. And I think that's where marketers, we have to understand. So the other big key here is influencers. So the biggest key right now, the reason why podcasting is a great combo effort when it comes to advertising and marketing is because not only do you have a captive audience, a know, like, and trust audience that's out there listening, okay, but the other thing is that you're kind of indirectly buying the influencer. So when you look at buying something on the Tim Ferriss show or the Joe Rogan Experience or any podcast that's out there, or The Ringer, like I've already talked about, you're getting Bill Simmons on the Bill Simmons podcast, or think of 1,000 different Pat Flynn. You're getting Pat Flynn to say your company's name. So you're getting, a lot of times, if you were to hire these people one-off to be spokespeople in a 30-second ad, they might be thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars more. But if you hire them you're basically hiring them to say your 30-second or 60-second ad or authentic PSA on your behalf, you're essentially hiring the influencer as much as you're hiring the podcast to do the work. So those key factors, I think, is why marketers and advertisers want to look at podcast advertising. It's also on the rise. It's not as crowded of a channel. So when you look at blogs and you look at newspapers and, again, TV is very oversaturated with ads. Podcasting is a new form of, more concentrated eyeballs, more concentrated ears. And it's a great way to get a message out to, again, a loyal audience that's coming to listen to just that person. And you're authentically getting the influencer to help you push your products. So I'll give you one case study. We did a promotion with the Dale Jr. Download, which is Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s podcast last year. Or it's still his current podcast. We did the promotion last year. And we felt like for the money that it was a great thing because people are super loyal to Dale Jr.'s podcast and what he says they trust. And so if he's pushing, different products, you can know that it's coming from a genuine place, because when I talked to Dale Jr.'s team about doing that sponsorship, basically they were saying, we have a lot of people approaching us to be sponsors on the podcast, but we are not taking all comers. We are only taking products that Dale likes, knows, and trusts himself. So, and the case study came out, we had a really good, solid spike in traffic. That's how we were tracking it. We were tracking it via a custom URL, and we had a good spike in traffic and some good sales, enough sales to offset the advertisement itself. And then another key factor in podcasts is they essentially live on forever and they're evergreen. So somebody who may have just started the Dale Jr. Download and is binge listening to last year's podcast, last spring, you would have heard on the Rusty Wallace episode, a Bristol Motor Speedway advertisement, and that's because we sponsored that podcast. And they happen to talk about Rusty's one of our most winning drivers and is a Bristol legend, so they had a lot of conversation about it as well. But it was done from an authentic place because when I talked to them, it was, yeah, we want to help you. Dale loves the track and he wants to help. So this is not something that every single opportunity they're going to say yes to. So think about podcast advertising today. Think about it in your marketing mix. I think that you will see solid results. The other, just as a PS, a postscript on this, please track your spends. Give them a custom URL, give them a promo code, because you really can track it just as much as you track another digital ad. So please, please, please measure what you're spending money on so that you know what to spend money on the next time. So give podcast advertising a try. Look at a platform like Podcorn or Anchor. You can actually, as a brand, you can go in there and you can set up an account and you can look at and you can put out a promotion and see if you can connect with some podcasters and see if you can make it work. So that's a couple good platforms to start with. And then, of course, you can go directly to Spotify and some other ones. But give it a try today, or contact the show directly. I'm sure the show, just like mine, you can contact me directly, drewbedard@gmail.com. Like, shoot me an email, shoot any one of these hosts an email, and you're probably going to get a response to, integrate your brand into the show. So that's some tactical advice today. Give podcast advertising a try. I think that you'll really like it. I think for the audience that you're trying to reach, again, you can be very direct. Podcasts are very niche. So if you know your avatar really, really well, that we've talked about on this podcast before, if you know your avatar really, really well, you should know the type of podcast that you're going after. Have a great day. Thanks for listening. See you next week.